As you could see from what Marielle, what she stood for, what she fought for, and what she died for, that, she didn't separate the struggles, the oppressions, gender oppression, the struggle against racism. She embodied so much of these important struggles. And this is no accident, whether you're in this country or around the world, especially if you have an understanding of what capitalism and imperialism is all about. And I wanted to raise a couple more examples of this because I was able to show I was in Boston this past weekend, and I was able to show the Lorraine Hansberry film that a number of us saw here, and she's the brilliant black playwright of A Raisin in the Sun, but also she was a revolutionary as well. And she stated in a 1959 interview with Studs Terkel, now think about it, 1959, that she said these words, quote, "Obviously the most oppressed group of any group will be its women, who are twice oppressed. So I imagine that they react accordingly. As oppression makes people more militant, women become twice militant because they are twice oppressed," end quote. And then 25 years later, Paula Giddings, in her groundbreaking book, When and Where I Enter, The Impact of Black Women on Race and Sex in America, she stated in her preface, quote, "Throughout their history, black women also understood the relationship between the progress of the race and their own feminism. Women's rights were an empty promise if Afro-Americans were crushed under the heel of a racist power structure. In times of racial militancy, black women threw their considerable energies into that struggle, even at the expense of their feminist yearnings. However, when militancy faltered, black women stepped forward to demand the rights of their race from the broader society and their rights from their men. The latter demand was not seen in the context of race versus sex, but as one where their right had to be secured in order to assure black progress," end quote. Giddings, Ann Hansberry, and Marielle viewed women's liberation as an integral part of the struggle for black liberation. This has become to be known as a revolution within a revolution, dating back to the days of slavery, where black people are concerned. It was Sojourner Truth who escaped slavery in 1826 with her daughter to become an abolitionist and a suffragist. And in 1851, she spoke at a women's conference in Akron, Ohio in 1851. This is where she made her powerful "Ain't I a Woman" speech. And I just want to read a little bit of it, because it still resonates today. Quote, "That man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody helped me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place, and ain't I a woman? Look at me. Look at my arm. I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could hit me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as a man when I could get it, and bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children and seen most of all sold off to slavery. And when I cried out with my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman?" End quote. Reconstruction. Saw black people making strides to win their bourgeois democratic rights following the end of the Civil War, building their own schools and institutions, gaining political power through the elections to state legislatures in the South. In some areas, black people were even armed by the Union Army to protect themselves against attacks from the remnants of the slaveocracy, all regrouping in order to regain state power. The new federal government, led by Andrew Johnson, a Confederate sympathizer in the White House, withdrew the Union Army, which tragically gave new life to the former slave owners to usher in a reign of white supremacist terror on the black population. This counter-revolution resulted in the overturn of all the progressive gains, replaced by semi-slavery conditions in the South, which gave rise to the KKK, lynchings, sharecropping, and low wages. Racist Jim Crow became legalized by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1898, forcing millions of black folks to migrate from the South to the North. The overthrow of Reconstruction has shaped the ongoing struggle for black equality and liberation, no matter what the forms or the demands. Du Bois stated in his classic book, The Souls of Black Folks, written in 1902, that the greatest crisis facing the 20th century was the quote-unquote color line. This reality inspired black women fighters like Ida B. Wells, who attempted to appeal to the white-led suffragist movement to show solidarity with the anti-lynching laws and protest. Lucy Parsons, as we just saw, a founding member of the International Workers of the World, and a woman of indigenous, Mexican, and African descent, was also a founder of International Workers' Day, May Day, in 1886. She fought for the rights of women workers and for racial equality. Amy Jaquez Garvey was a very popular leader of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, founded in the early 1900s by her Jamaican-born spouse, Marcus Garvey, which is still to this day the largest black-led movement in U.S. history. This was a movement that promoted black-owned businesses to challenge the white-dominated, quote-unquote, corporate America, and also popularized the Back to Africa movement. Amy Garvey was an author who wrote on black nationalism and Pan-Africanism, which is a bona fide right to self-determination of the oppressed black nation, no matter where they live. The Black Panther Party had dynamic, in-your-face women leaders like Erica Huggins, Elaine Brown, Kathleen Cleaver, Joan Bird. Despite some backward ideas they faced within their own organization, they still viewed their liberation as women within the prism of fighting for national liberation. When others on the left criticized the Panthers for being quote-unquote ultra-left, Workers' World Party showed solidarity with the Panthers in theory and in practice in the streets as we denounce the state racist violence against them. It was our party that held a demonstration on March 8, 1970, in front of the Women's House of Detention to demand the freedom of the women political prisoners who were members of the Panther 21. I think some of the women who were there are in this room. And during the Civil Rights Movement, strong black women like Diane Nash and Ella Baker were in the leadership of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, and then, of course, the National Black Liberation Army, like our sister Assata Shakur. What is the common thread between women's oppression and national liberation, and in this case, black liberation? It's that the capitalist economic system, based on putting profits before meeting the needs of human beings, and no matter which capitalist party, Democrat or Republican, administers the state, has been and is still incapable of eradicating institutionalized racism and white supremacy, as well as other forms of special oppression like LGBTQ oppression, let alone economic inequality. This is the permanent phase of the global economic crisis, or capitalism at a dead end, that has rendered larger and larger sections of the multinational working class as quote-unquote expendable, especially people of color, including youth, women, gender nonconforming people, those with disabilities in disproportionate numbers. But even white workers are not excluded from becoming expendable, as the recent West Virginia teacher strike showed, a strike that was overwhelmingly women and that is encouraging even more strikes, like the one in Jersey City, and possibly in Oklahoma and Kentucky in April. Wishing for a gentler, kinder capitalism, as Bernie Sanders' campaign preached, is delusional.
That's right.
The clock can never be turned back on the early days of capitalism. How can you reform a system founded on the bloody backs of millions of enslaved people?
That's right.
How can you reform a system founded on the genocidal theft of indigenous lands, including almost all of Mexico, which constitutes the Southwest, along with the colonization of other lands through wars and occupations, that thrives on sanctioning the murder and mass incarceration of black and brown and indigenous youth, that objectifies women and oppresses lesbian, gay, queer, gender nonconforming people? How can you reform a system that denies millions of people the right to health care, education, housing, and the basic human needs? History has proven over and over again that capitalism cannot be reformed, that capitalists don't control their system, that the capitalist laws of development control them, that capitalism holds no bright future for the younger generations, hoping to have it better than their parents and grandparents. That's why these students all over the country are going to be marching on Saturday for their lives. You know, whether they politically developed or not, they're going to be in motion, and that's why we need to be there to reach out to them. Capitalism has worn out its welcome, and only the working class can become its gravediggers. As the current global economic crisis continues to drive down wages for all workers, relatively speaking, the late chairperson of Workers' World Party, Sam Marcy, stated in his 1986 book, High Tech and Low Pay, that these changes within the economy have created the feminization of labor, which is really the feminization of poverty, for millions of women workers on a global scale. But with this repression comes resistance. Like in the U.S., the low-wage workers, especially African American and Latinx women, many of whom are single mothers, who continue to fight for $15 an hour. These workers are some of the most dynamic sectors of the new working class. Sisters and brothers, comrades and friends, we must continue to fight for socialism, never forgetting all the black women who have lost their lives to racist police brutality, women of color who have died in childbirth due to lack of health care, for immigrant women who face deportations, indigenous women fighting for environmental justice, for Palestinian women like the fierce political prisoner Ahed Tamimi, fighting for their homeland, and for all of the survivors of sexual violence who have been empowered by, quote, by Me Too and Time's Up movements and much more. The advancement of any society is measured by the advancement of women. The ongoing Cuban Revolution and the Soviet Union, while in existence for 75 years, with their lower level of production, is proof positive that women have much to gain under socialism, along with all of the workers. These revolutions prove that a new state in the hands of the workers to produce everything in society that we need to become productive human beings is necessary and inevitable for the liberation of all workers, including women. Long live the spirit of Marielle Franco. Long live the spirit of Berta Caceres. Long live the spirit of Lynn Stewart. Let's build a workers' world.